Hmm. Hey there, it's Clyde. I'm glad you wandered in. Before we drift anywhere at all, go ahead and tap the like button, just so you don't forget once your eyes get heavy. And if you want more of these quiet, wandering adventures, I keep them all together for you in a playlist. Every boring journey, all in one place. It's like a little library of nothing happening, and somehow that's the best part. And, if you ever want your own personalized sleepy story, becoming a channel member is the easiest way. It helps support the channel, and it lets me make something just for you. Something soft, slow, and comfortably uneventful. All right, let's start this one. I was walking along a narrow dirt path that wound between a few small wooden houses, structures so simple that even the nails looked like they felt out of place. The sun was lowering itself slowly, almost reluctantly, behind the trees, and the sky was doing that thing where it can't decide if it wants to be orange or pale blue. It's a nice stage of the day, the part that feels like it's exhaling, and that's when I smelled it. Bread. Freshly baked. Still warm, probably. A little crisp on the outside. A little soft inside. Something with a crust that crackles just enough when you pull it apart. I didn't know what kind it was, of course I never ask. I just guess quietly to myself and then get it wrong every single time. It sort of drifted around me like it was trying to make sure I noticed. At first I thought it might just be the wind, but then I passed someone carrying a wooden tray covered with a cloth, and the scent got stronger. The woman carrying it nodded politely at me, like I was just another neighbor. She had that Pilgrim look. Bonnet, apron, the whole thing. But she also had a noticeable smudge of flour on her eyebrow, as if she'd scratched her head without thinking I didn't tell her. Somewhere a little ways off, a cow mooed with the tone of someone complaining about something extremely trivial. And closer by, someone was chopping wood. Slowly, deliberately, with pauses that felt less like rest and more like the person was thinking very hard between each swing. I took another breath. That bread smell. It was almost sweet, but not quite. Almost earthy, but not quite. Almost like something that would be served with a very small wooden spoon for no logical reason. To my right, a boy ran by holding a chicken under one arm. The chicken looked incredibly offended. Not scared, not confused, just offended, like the boy had interrupted her very important plans. I considered asking what he was doing, but I was already falling behind my own thoughts, and it didn't seem fair to interrupt hers. A few houses down, a group of settlers were tending to a small fire. They were roasting something. Corn, I think, though it might have been the world's least cooperative root. Vegetable. One man poked it with a stick in a way that said he didn't fully trust anything round. As I kept walking, the path got softer under my feet, and a little breeze brushed past, carrying more bread scent with it. It's funny how smells do that. How they travel so confidently, just floating around like they own the place. I caught myself wondering if maybe it wasn't even bread at all. Maybe it was some other pilgrim food I'd never heard of. Something with a name like hearth cakes or settler rounds or flour lumps. But then, a dog trotted by with half a biscuit in its mouth, and I was relieved to see that some things, at least a few things, were familiar. The houses around me were quiet except for small sounds. Clay cups being set on tables, a broom swishing insistently against a doorway, someone humming a hymn I didn't recognize. It was a settlement going about its evening exactly the way settlements do, which is to say, slowly, practically, and without any interest whatsoever in making a scene. And I liked that. It made me feel like nothing urgent was expected of me. I walked a little further, letting the conversation of the bread smell fill the space in my mind. It didn't tell me anything important, just sort of made suggestions about what could be a round loaf, maybe. Or something flatter, or something with herbs, or something plain. The possibilities stacked on top of each other like mismatched chairs. A man carrying a wooden bucket passed me and said something friendly, Something about the weather, I think, but his accent was thick and shaped differently than mine, so I just nodded in a way that seemed respectful. A moment later, my foot nudged a small object in the dirt. I looked down. A spoon, just sitting there, alone, as if someone had dropped it mid-meal and simply never returned for it. I picked it up, then put it on a fence rail nearby. I don't know why. It just felt like the right thing to do. Spoons shouldn't be abandoned. They have enough to deal with already. The bread smell drifted by again, like a gentle reminder, and somewhere in the distance, someone rang a small bell to let the settlement know supper was ready. I didn't follow the sound. Not yet. I just kept walking softly, letting the evening settle around me like a blanket someone warmed by the fire. The thing about Pilgrim settlements is that they're simple, but they're never empty. Every corner has something quietly happening, even if it looks like nothing at first glance. A cat curled under a bench, a rope drying on a hook, a carved wooden toy left sitting on a barrel as if waiting for its owner to return. And me, just drifting, guessing what kind of bread could possibly smell that comforting. I wandered a little farther down the narrow path, and the bread smell somehow got stronger, which didn't seem physically possible unless the entire settlement was conspiring to bake at the same moment. Not that I would blame them. If I lived here, I might bake things constantly too, mostly just to warm my hands. A rooster strutted by with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the entire colony. I stepped aside out of respect. He gave me a look that seemed to say he accepted my apology for existing on his road. I nodded back. These treaties are important. Another breeze drifted past, carrying that smell again. Warm, soft, a little sweet. I started guessing again. Maybe it was rye, or maybe wheat, or maybe one of those combinations that sound simple but are actually complicated, like brown bread that somehow ends up being 6 different grains all negotiating for space. I passed a man who was carving something on a piece of wood. He didn't look up, but I noticed the carving was turning into a spoon, a very large one. A spoon too big for any reasonable kitchen. Maybe it was ceremonial, or maybe he was just having a day. Sometimes you just carve a giant spoon because life suggests it. A little girl in a linen dress was sitting on a doorstep playing with a bundle of sticks arranged in a neat line. She tapped one, then another, as if taking attendance. I didn't interrupt. Her classroom seemed very strict. As I kept walking, more of the settlement came into view. Small houses with steeply pitched roofs, little fenced gardens, and a few fenced-in chickens who seemed deeply suspicious of everyone. One hen watched me with the eyes of someone ready to file a complaint. Off near a stack of firewood, a man and woman were talking quietly. I couldn't hear what they were discussing, but their gestures implied it was either extremely important or extremely trivial. Moments like that could go either way in history. In the center of the settlement, a wooden table held several kinds of food, mostly vegetables, dried herbs, and something wrapped in cloth that looked like it might be salt, but could have been absolutely anything pilgrims liked: mysteries. I walked past and caught another wave of the bread smell, and this time it felt so close it was like someone was trying to hand me the loaf itself. I didn't turn around because I didn't want to find out I was wrong. It's fun to imagine things before you see them. Once you see them, that's just reality. Imagination has more room to wiggle. A child ran by chasing a dog, or maybe the dog was chasing the child, or maybe neither was chasing either, and they were simply participating in parallel chaos. The child giggled, the dog barked, and neither seemed particularly concerned about which one was supposed to be in charge. I stopped near a garden where late-season herbs were growing. Sage, thyme, something else that might have been mint or might have been a weed pretending to be mint. I bent down to smell it, but before I could, the bread smell swept in again like it didn't want me forgetting who the main character of this settlement was. A woman stirring a pot over a small fire lifted her spoon to her mouth to taste. made a face, then added something from a little pouch. Whatever she added made nearby chickens suddenly look alert, so maybe it was something interesting. I leaned against a fence post just for a moment, letting everything settle. The evening sounds were soft but busy, the kind of busy that feels soothing rather than stressful. Footsteps in dirt, quiet voices, fire crackling, a bucket being set down, a broom brushing against a wooden floor. Someone even laughed, which surprised me. You don't usually picture pilgrims laughing, but I guess they did. People laugh everywhere, even in places where the bread is trying very hard to outshine everything else. I took one more long breath, letting the smell drift through me like a gentle idea. Whatever that bread was, it was waiting, somewhere close. And I had a feeling the evening would take me straight to it whether I tried or not. I stepped off the fence post, brushed a bit of dust from my cloak, and started walking toward the sound of a wooden door closing gently in the distance. The settlement was settling, and so was I. I walked toward the sound of that wooden door closing, mostly because it felt like a clue, and partially because it's hard not to follow a good door sound. There's something very satisfying about the way old wood settles back into place. A little creak, a soft thump, like it's sighing after being opened for one reason too many. The path curved, and suddenly the scent of the bread swept past me so strongly that for a moment I wasn't sure if I was smelling with my nose or with my imagination. It was that warm, deep sort of bread smell that makes the air feel heavier, like it's carrying memories it doesn't want to talk about. Ahead of me was a small table outside one of the houses, its legs uneven in a charming, someone tried their best kind of way. On the table was a loaf. The loaf, the one that had been following me around like a polite ghost. It looked simple, round, lightly browned, with a few cracks across the top where the steam must have escaped. Nothing fancy, but it had that handmade confidence that only comes from someone kneading it while thinking very intensely about something, possibly 9 different things at once. A pilgrim woman stood behind the table, slicing the loaf with a knife that looked older than the settlement itself. Every slice came away clean, and the inside looked soft enough that I almost apologized for staring. She didn't look at me, which I appreciated. Sometimes it's nice to admire bread without turning it into a social interaction. A boy next to her was arranging a pile of kindling into what could generously be described as a structure. It didn't resemble anything I've ever seen fire cooperate with, but children have a lot of optimism about sticks. As I stepped closer, a man carrying a stack of firewood passed behind me. He grunted in a way that might have been a greeting or might have been commentary on the firewood itself. It's impossible to know. Pilgrim grunts require subtitles. I took in another breath. The bread smell was even stronger up close, which is exactly what you expect from bread, but somehow still surprising every time. A chicken hopped onto the table, considered the loaf, and was immediately shooed away by the woman without her even breaking rhythm in her slicing. She must have done that 1,000 times. I nearly smiled, but then, out of the corner of my eye, something caught my attention. A tiny wooden spinning top sat near one corner of the table, just sitting there, alone, like it had been forgotten mid-spin. I reached out and gave it a little tap. It spun, perfectly balanced. Where did it come from? Why was it there? Did it belong to the child with the stick sculpture? Or was this settlement full of tiny, roaming objects that simply appeared places to remind people the world was surprising? I watched it turn until it slowed and wobbled, and then softly tipped over. The bread smell wrapped around me again, patient, warm, entirely unhurried. I still didn't ask what kind it was. Some things are more fun not knowing. Behind me, a group of settlers were discussing something about harvest time. The words "blighted potatoes" floated through the air, followed by "not again," which sounded familiar enough to make me think this was a repeating concern. A dog trotted past with a piece of rope in its mouth. 2 children followed it, trying very hard to look casual, which made me immediately suspicious of whatever plan they had. I stood there beside the table, letting the last rays of sunlight turn the entire settlement gold, and letting the bread's warmth seep into my thoughts. Maybe I'd get closer. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe the evening would decide that for me. The loaf didn't reveal anything at all, but it still felt like it winked. And gently, I wandered on. I kept walking past the table where the bread was being sliced, mostly because I didn't trust myself not to stare at it like it was a long-lost friend. Instead, I wandered down a narrow path lined with houses that looked like they had been built in the same afternoon by the same group of very determined, very tired people. The air was getting cooler, wrapping around me like a shawl. It made the warmth from the bread trail behind me like a memory. Still trying to stay present, I didn't mind. It was comforting. Like someone humming a lullaby from the next room over. A man carrying a wooden pail nodded to me as he walked by. His hat sat a little crooked on his head, but in a deliberate way, almost like he never wore it straight out of principle. A small feather stuck out from one side, though it was unclear whether that was an accessory or simply an accident involving a very surprised bird. Up ahead, a woman sat on a small stool mending a shirt with the kind of focus usually reserved for maps or diplomatic treaties. She didn't look up as I passed, but her needle moved with precise rhythm. It made a soft tap-tap scritch, a pattern so gentle it almost sounded like it belonged in a lullaby. Nearby, a child was poking at a stump with a stick, investigating it with the seriousness of a philosopher awaiting revelation. Every few seconds, he would lean in very closely, as if the stump might whisper something important. It didn't, of course. Stumps rarely do. The smell of the bread faded slightly as I moved away, but not completely. It lingered in my hair, my cloak, my imagination. Some scents do that, cling to you like they're afraid you'll forget them too quickly. A wagon sat nearby, its wheels muddy and its sideboards creaking lightly in the breeze. A man sat on the wagon's edge, sharpening a knife, not in a threatening way. More in the way someone sharpens a knife every evening because that's just what evenings are for. He hummed a tune as he worked. I didn't recognize it, but it sounded like it had been passed down through so many generations that nobody remembered the original words. As I passed, he glanced at me, like he almost wanted to say something. Something about the weather, or the crops, or maybe even the bread. His mouth opened slightly. And then he changed his mind. I nodded back as if to say yes. I also wasn't committed to this conversation. A chicken strutted across the path with such purpose that I stepped aside to let her pass. She didn't thank me, but she didn't have to. Some creatures simply assume respect is the natural order of things. Around the corner, I noticed something odd. A small wooden bowl sitting perfectly in the center of the path. Not off to the side. Not near a house, just centered, as if placed there by someone who believed bowls should be appreciated from all angles. I bent down and looked at it. Plain wood, smooth edges, a tiny knot in the grain that looked vaguely like a face if you squinted. I didn't touch it. I didn't trust it. Bowls appearing in the middle of paths usually have stories attached to them, and I didn't want to accidentally join one without being briefed. I stepped around it carefully, like it might be a sleeping creature, then continued on my way. Farther ahead, someone was singing quietly while sweeping a doorway. The tune drifted across the path, soft and slow, a little uneven in a charming way, as if the singer kept forgetting the melody and making up new parts to fill the gaps. The settlement was settling in for the evening, and I felt myself settling with it. My footsteps slowed without me deciding to slow them. The world softened around the edges like dusk had dipped everything in warm water. I paused near a fence and watched a pair of settlers talking beside a fire. Their words were quiet, carried away by the wind before I could hear even one. but their hands gestured slowly, calmly, like they were discussing something humble and real. Harvests, chores, stories from home. And even though I wasn't part of their conversation, it felt nice just being near it. I leaned gently against the fence rail, feeling the texture of rough wood against my sleeve. Somewhere, faint but clear, the bread smell drifted by again, as if to say, "You're not done with me yet," and I supposed I wasn't. The path curved again, the way paths always seem to do when they want to pretend they're leading somewhere specific. I followed it without thinking too hard, my boots brushing over patches of grass that had been flattened earlier by someone with much more purpose than me. Ahead, a group of settlers stood near a small fire pit, though calling it a group might be generous. It was really more of a loosely assembled cluster of people who happened to be facing the same direction. Each of them seemed to be there for a different reason. One man leaned on a wooden staff as though it were the only thing preventing him from floating away. A woman stood with her hands in her apron pockets, rocking slightly, heel to toe, heel to toe. A teenager stared into the fire like he was trying to read the future in it, but the future refused to cooperate. None of them were talking. Not because anything was wrong, but because talking seemed like a lot of work in a moment that didn't require any. I slowed my steps to match the quiet. Dusk was deepening now, turning the settlement the color of warm tea. Somewhere behind one of the houses, a cow made a long, dramatic moo, like it wanted everyone to know it had opinions about the time of day. The fire ahead cracked softly. Little sparks flickered upward, deciding for a brief, rebellious moment that maybe gravity wasn't for them after all. A man crouched beside the fire was slowly turning a wooden skewer between his fingers. On the end of it, an onion, or something onion-adjacent, was roasting unevenly, one side already very committed to being charred while the rest remained pale and stubborn. He didn't seem concerned. Maybe uneven cooking was the point. I approached quietly, not wanting to disturb the not-quite gathering. The warmth of the fire brushed against my hands, and I held them out a little closer, letting the heat soak in. One of the settlers nodded to me, just once, an unspoken acknowledgement that I was now part of this vague circle of people who weren't doing anything in particular. A chicken wandered into the firelight, paused, then wandered right back out again, like it had been expecting something far more interesting. I didn't take it personally. Behind me, a wooden door opened, then closed again. Someone coughed, someone else stirred a pot. The whole settlement moved at a pace that felt just a little bit slower than time itself. As I stood there, letting my thoughts drift around in their own messy orbit, I noticed something at the edge of the fire pit. A small bundle of herbs tied together with twine. Someone must have placed it there earlier, maybe to dry, maybe for cooking, or maybe simply because they needed to set something down and that was the nearest horizontal surface. I knelt down to look at it more closely. Sage, a little rosemary. One sprig I didn't recognize at all, which made me think someone was experimenting. Brave soul. The fire popped, startling a boy who had been staring so intently at the flames that he nearly toppled backward. He caught himself at the last second and gave me a quick glance as if to confirm the fire had embarrassed him on purpose. I smiled and nodded back in a solemn, understanding way. Fires do that sometime. As the heat reached my face, I realized the bread smell had faded again, drifting somewhere behind the houses. But its warm echo lingered, like it was still choosing where to go next and would eventually wrap back around to me when it felt like it. The settlers continued their quiet, not gathering, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts while sharing the same patch of evening. It was peaceful in a way that didn't require participation. I stayed long enough to feel the fire settle into me, warming my chest and softening the edges of everything around me. Then, with no particular destination in mind, I stepped back into the golden dim and kept walking. I wandered away from the small fire pit, letting the warmth fade slowly off my hands, the way a goodbye lingers after you've already turned around. The sky had settled fully into that deep, bluish dusk now. The kind that feels like someone dimmed the world with a giant lampshade. A few houses down, a single lantern hung on a crooked hook beside a doorway. The flame inside flickered gently, tossing soft shadows across the wooden boards. It wasn't trying to be mysterious, but it was succeeding anyway. I stepped closer. Sometimes lanterns feel like little worlds, with their own weather and their own priorities. This one's flame leaned to one side as though whispering something to the glass, and I had the strange urge to whisper back. Beside the lantern, a woman was shaking dust off a woven rug. Each shake sent a quiet puff into the air, drifting away like tiny ghosts who were late for an appointment. She nodded to me in that quiet, polite Pilgrim way. Not unfriendly, just efficient. The kind of nod people give when they've spent all day doing things and still have a few more to do before the sun gives up completely. I nodded back, trying to look as though I had somewhere productive to be too. I didn't, but it's good to blend in. On the opposite side of the path, a man knelt beside a wooden bucket, scrubbing it with a brush. He hummed softly, off-key but confidently, which is the best combination for humming. He paused halfway through one note to adjust his hat, then picked up right where he left off, like the melody had been patiently waiting for him to return. Farther ahead, I saw something small in the dirt, another object claiming the road as its home. A button, just sitting there, a large wooden button. Round, smooth, and worn enough that I wondered how many coats or shirts it had lived on before finally giving up and rolling into the middle of the path. I bent down, picked it up, and brushed off a bit of dust. There was no one nearby who looked recently debuttoned, so I set it gently on a fence rail beside a coil of rope. Maybe its owner would pass by later and feel that tiny spark of relief you get when something you'd forgotten suddenly reappears. A child ran past me then, barefoot, holding a handful of feathers in both hands. He looked delighted. One feather floated away behind him as he ran, like a small breadcrumb for someone determined to follow an extremely confusing trail. Somewhere above, an owl let out a short, sleepy call. Not urgent, not even particularly interested. Just an owl checking in with the night. I tilted my head and listened to it echo faintly through the settlement. The lantern beside me flickered again, casting light across a patch of herbs tied in bundles under the eaves of the house. Sage, again. Maybe thyme, something else that smelled faintly medicinal. The kind of herb you pretend to like so you seem practical. Behind me, a door creaked open. A man stepped out, holding a small plate with something steaming on it. He squinted into the dark as though trying to identify the exact level of evening he was stepping into. Satisfied with whatever answer he found, he took a slow bite and nodded, like he approved of his own cooking. I wasn't sure what he was eating, but the steam carried a scent that reminded me of broth and maybe early onions. Or possibly very late onions. Onions are complicated creatures. The lantern swung gently as a breeze drifted through, the flame inside making tiny waves on the glass. I watched it for a long moment, letting my thoughts wander from the bread I still hadn't discovered to the button on the fence to the owl somewhere above us, settling into its nightly schedule. It was a peaceful kind of drifting, the kind where you're not thinking about anything in particular, but everything around you still feels important in small, simple ways. A woman walked past carrying a basket, the kind woven tightly enough to last through storms. She didn't seem to notice me until she was nearly beside me, and then she gave me a quick, soft smile. The kind people offer when they don't know you but feel like you're safe to smile at anyway. I smiled back. The lantern glowed a little brighter for a moment, and I wondered if someone inside had trimmed the wick, or maybe the breeze just wanted to play with it. Either way, it was nice. The scent of the bread drifted by again. faint now, as if wandering the settlement just as aimlessly as I was. I let it pass and kept walking. I followed the path as it curved past the lantern-lit doorway and into a quieter stretch of the settlement. The night had finally decided to settle in fully, the sky turning the deep blue of ink before it dries. The air felt thicker, calmer, the kind of calm that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. Somewhere far behind me, a dog barked once, then seemed to think better of it. Even loud creatures get sleepy eventually. A man ahead of me was carrying a wooden crate, but he wasn't in a hurry. He walked slowly, like each step was a negotiation with the ground. When he reached the doorway of a house, he set the crate down with a soft thunk and wiped his brow with the sleeve of his tunic. He looked satisfied in a quiet way, the way people look when they finish something simple that still needed doing. As I passed, he gave me a small nod. Not a greeting. More of a shared understanding that night work is different from day work. I nodded back. A faint breeze drifted past, cool and gentle, carrying with it the very softest hint of that bread smell again. It was so faint now, like the memory of a scent rather than the scent itself. The kind that lingers on fabric after someone walks away. I breathed it in anyway. A group of children were sitting in a loose cluster near one of the houses, playing some kind of game that involved pebbles arranged in a circle. The rules were unclear, and judging by the frequency of quiet arguments, I wasn't entirely sure the children themselves knew the rules either. One child flicked a pebble, another gasped as if that was absolutely forbidden, and then they all decided to change the rules again. I kept walking. On my left, someone had hung dried herbs along the outside wall of a house. They rustled lightly as the breeze moved past, making a sound almost like parchment pages turning, sage, rosemary, something that smelled faintly like mint, and something else that was trying very hard to smell like mint, but wasn't quite convincing. A shadow perched on the top of a fence post caught my eye. A small bird settling in for the night. It fluffed its feathers twice, tucked its head under its wing, and went still with the peaceful confidence of a creature who knows exactly how to sleep outdoors. I stopped for a moment just to watch it breathe. Sometimes I think the world breathes with you if you stand still long enough. Somewhere across the settlement, a shutter closed softly. The sound traveled through the quiet like a pebble dropped into a pond. Then another door creaked shut. Then another. The whole village was preparing to end the day. I glanced down at the path in front of me and noticed a stray stick lying across it, perfectly straight, like it had auditioned for a role in someone's kindling pile but didn't make the final cut. I stepped over it carefully, not wanting to disturb its retirement. A woman carrying a basket passed me on her way toward one of the houses. The basket looked heavier than anything anyone should be carrying at night, but she didn't seem bothered. She walked with steady steps, and when she passed, I caught the slightest scent of dried apples drifting from the basket. Sweet, soft, almost sleepy. I smiled as she went by. The path opened up again near a small clearing where someone had left a wooden stool facing the trees, as if they'd been watching the forest settle into the night. The stool was empty now, but I could still sense the warmth from whoever had been sitting there. It felt like the kind of spot someone chose when they wanted a moment to themselves without actually leaving the settlement. I stood near it for a moment, not sitting, just sharing the space. The night finally exhaled, long and slow. The settlement was quiet. The sky was deep. The bread lingered faintly on the edge of thought, and I kept walking, gently, as if the ground might fall asleep before I did. I stayed near that little clearing for a while, long enough that the coolness of evening settled over my shoulders like an extra cloak. It wasn't cold, just the kind of air that makes you think about warm hands and crackling fires, and maybe an extra blanket that smells faintly of wood smoke. I began walking again, and with each step, the world around me shifted into its nighttime version of itself. quieter, slower, but also more talkative in strange ways. A cricket chirped somewhere near my boot, loudly enough to make itself known, but softly enough to pretend it wasn't trying to get my attention. I nodded politely in its direction anyway, which is just good manners when greeting night creatures. Farther ahead, I heard the soft clunk of wood against wood. A man was stacking logs beside his door, arranging them in a neat pile with the seriousness of someone assembling a particularly important puzzle. Each piece was carefully placed, adjusted, considered, then placed again. I admired his dedication. Firewood deserved that level of respect, probably. Across the path, two women were whispering near a small porch, leaning in close, sharing something that made both of them smile in that quiet, private way. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone reminded me of secrets that aren't really secrets, just small thoughts people share because they trust each other. It was nice, gentle, human. A soft rustling sound came from one of the gardens. I glanced over and saw a rabbit sitting very still, pretending it wasn't responsible for the missing leaves on a nearby cabbage. The rabbit made eye contact with me, froze even harder, and gave me the expression of someone hoping I wasn't going to report him. I didn't. That cabbage wasn't my business. Nearby, someone's shutter creaked slightly in the breeze, knocking softly against the frame. The sound repeated every few seconds. Tap, 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 like a lazy drum keeping rhythm for the night. I passed another lantern hanging from a house, this one flickering more dramatically than the last. The flame leapt, then dipped, then regained confidence as if performing for a very small audience. I stopped to watch it for a moment. Flames have a way of looking like they're thinking about something important. Behind me, footsteps approached, soft, unhurried, the kind of steps someone takes when they're not sure if they're going outside or just stretching their legs. When I turned, I saw an older man walking with his hands clasped behind his back. He hummed a long, meandering note as he passed, nodding to me with that familiar Pilgrim politeness. I nodded back, though I wasn't entirely sure what the humming meant. It sounded like a tune that had forgotten it was supposed to be a tune. As I walked on, I noticed a small wooden cup sitting beside a doorstep. Not a fancy cup, just a simple carved one with uneven edges. It looked recently washed, still glistening from the leftover water. I crouched down and gave it a small look, as though expecting it to reveal something. It didn't. It was just a cup, but a very dedicated one. Up ahead, someone stirred something inside a tin pot, and the faint clink of metal drifted through the air. A comforting sound, the kind kitchens make right before settling in for the night. The sky darkened fully now, with only a few streaks of purple left near the horizon. A couple of faint stars peeked through, blinking as if testing the idea of being awake. From somewhere deeper in the settlement, a child's laughter burst out suddenly, just one short laugh, before they were hushed gently by a tired adult. The laugh echoed lightly through the evening, then faded into the calm like a skipped stone settling back into still water. The night around me wasn't silent, but it was peaceful in a way silence can only hope to be. And as I stepped farther along the path, letting the darkness fold around me like a soft curtain, I realized the scent of the bread still drifted faintly. Just a whisper now, but still there. Still choosing not to leave. I took a slow breath and walked on. I walked farther into the settlement, letting the darkness fold around me like a blanket someone had just shaken out. Soft, a little cool, and full of tiny pockets of warmer air where lanterns still glowed. The night had fully taken over now, but it wasn't heavy. More like a gentle host showing everyone to their seats. Somewhere behind one of the houses, someone was finishing up the last of their chores. I could hear the rhythmic scrape of a broom brushing over a wooden floor, steady and almost hypnotic. Every few strokes, whoever was sweeping paused, maybe to look out at the sky or listen to how the evening was settling. Then the sweeping continued. Soft, soft, soft. Near a fence, two boys were whispering to each other, giggling in that way children do when they know they're supposed to be quiet. One of them pointed toward something I couldn't see, the other shook his head, and then both of them shushed each other at the same time. They tiptoed away, which made absolutely no difference at all. A cat appeared then, slipping out from behind a barrel with the kind of confidence animals have when they know you're too tired to question their authority. The cat looked at me, blinked very slowly, and then walked past like I was a temporary decoration in its evening plans. I turned a corner, and the scent drifted toward me again. The bread. Still faint, but unmistakable. Soft around the edges. Warm even in memory. A smell with absolutely no intention of leaving this settlement quietly. I paused, letting it wrap gently around the moment. It wasn't strong enough to follow, but just strong enough to make me feel like the day hadn't quite ended. The door of a nearby house creaked open, and a woman stepped out carrying a candle cupped in both hands. The flame wavered as she shielded it from the breeze. She didn't look at me, but she moved with that careful, practiced calm of someone who's been through many nights just like this one. She set the candle on a small wooden shelf, nodded at it as if approving its glow, and slipped back inside. The door shut softly. I walked a little farther, my boots brushing over the path in a slow, steady rhythm. The ground felt more worn here, like many feet had walked this exact stretch on their way to finish their final thoughts before bedtime. To my right, a man was sitting on a small stool beside a doorway, mending a pair of leather shoes. His hands worked slowly, steadily, threading long cords through tiny holes. He didn't look up, but the quiet scratch of his work filled the space between us. After a moment, he exhaled deeply, nodded to himself, and set one shoe aside, as though declaring it officially victorious. A lantern flickered near him, its glow shimmering on the freshly mended leather. I continued down the path, and the settlement stretched out ahead of me in a scatter of low, dark rooftops, each one dotted with a faint window glow, little pockets of warmth in the cool night. It reminded me of stars that had decided to come inside and rest for a while. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a door slam, not angrily, just firmly, like someone had decided the day was quite finished now. I took one more breath, letting the night settle around me, and that's when I felt it again, just a tiny thread of warmth in the air, a whisper of the bread. Not enough to chase, but enough to remember. Just a hint, just a suggestion, just the smell gently tapping me on the shoulder. As if saying, "You'll find me again later." I smiled. Bread always seemed to understand timing better than most people. The night felt soft, the path felt willing, and I kept walking deeper into the dark, where the lanterns flickered like they were holding themselves awake just long enough to see me pass by. I kept wandering down the narrow path, letting the quiet of the settlement settle even deeper around me. The lanterns flickered in soft little pockets of gold, each one swaying a bit in the breeze as though they were nodding off themselves. It was so calm now that even the air felt drowsy. A few houses away, someone blew out a candle, and a tiny thread of smoke curled upward like it was stretching before bed. I watched it drift until the night swallowed it completely. Another shutter closed. A latch clicked. The settlement was tucking itself in piece by piece. I walked a little further, feeling the cool earth beneath my boots and hearing nothing but the soft rustle of the grass, brushing against the wooden fences. Even the animals had quieted. A chicken settled under a porch. A horse shifted gently in a small pen, exhaling a warm huff that faded into the darkness almost before it existed. Somewhere, very faintly, the bread smell drifted by again. Just a hint. A little good night. I took a slow breath and smiled to myself. It felt like the settlement was sharing something small and comforting before turning in for the night. like a final whispered thought between old friends. I stepped past one last house where a single window still glowed with candlelight. A shadow moved inside, someone checking a pot or packing away tools, going through their own quiet rituals. The light was warm enough to paint a faint path across the ground, as though showing me the way. Not urgently, just gently. I followed that soft glow until it faded into the dark behind me. The sky above was deep now, full of stars hidden just behind thin clouds. Not showing off, just waiting patiently for their turn. The night wrapped around the settlement like a blanket tucked in at the corners. And that's when I felt it. A soft vibration against my palm. A tiny, familiar hum. The faint warmth blooming gently from the smooth stone I kept tucked there. The travel stone? It hadn't said a word the entire night. Not a whisper, not a suggestion, not even a polite tap. But now, as the settlement grew still and the world held its breath for a moment, the stone glowed softly through my fingers, a little circle of warmth in the palm of my hand. It was time. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the night settle fully into my bones, letting the bread smell dissolve into memory, letting the lanterns flicker one by one in my periphery, letting the settlement finish its long exhale. Then I closed my fingers gently around the stone. The hum grew steadier, warmer, softer, like someone humming a lullaby meant only for me. The world around me blurred at the edges, at first like a slow blink, then like a curtain drawn back by invisible hands. The cool path beneath my boots warmed, the lantern stretched into lines of gold. The night bent softly around itself, folding inward like a page being turned. I exhaled once. Long, slow, sleepy. And the settlement faded away in a warm swirl of firelight, earth, and the memory of freshly baked bread drifting through the evening air. And just before everything slipped completely into the quiet glow of travel, I whispered a soft goodnight to the place behind me. And to you too. Thank you for walking with me. Come back anytime for another sleepy adventure. I'll be here, somewhere, wandering, waiting to drift with you again.